You're listening to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, John Wood Jr. Okay, so I'm joined here by some very special friends of mine, folks from Braver Angels, from the Unity movement, from the larger global Unity movement, of folks who are working together from across the aisle to not only have conversations, but figure out ways for us to actually join hands and fix this dysfunctional democracy together and hopefully having a good time in the process. I am joined by familiar, sometimes Braver Angels co-host, Braver Angels social media manager, Greg Steinbrecher. Say hello, Greg.
Hey, how you doing?
Not too bad, man. Not too bad.
Good.
I am joined by singer-songwriter extraordinaire and also a member of Braver Angels Music Committee, ambassador for Braver Angels. I think I can say that. Miss Alma Cook. How you doing,
Thank you, John.
Alma?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. It's so nice to see you. And also joined by a new friend of mine, who I'm so happy to have here with us today, a veteran of the Unity movement. Veteran makes it sound like it's been around a long time, of course, but people will be familiar with Unity 2020. That's what I'm talking about specifically. Miss Stacia Wilson. Stacia,
Thanks
how
for
you
having
doing?
me.
I'm so happy to have you here. Absolutely. And so, cool. All right, you guys. We are here. We are on the cusp of the election. And we are kind of, I think, all interesting creatures because I think each and every one of us got here because one way or another, we all have our political sensibilities and so forth. But I think that we all have this sense that there's kind of a fundamental threat to sort of the spirit and the functionality of our political society because, you know, we've been so balkanized by all sorts of things, media, the conventional culture of party politics, social media, and, you know, so many other things, the way we're talking about, race and class and all sorts of different issues, that it seems like there's got to be sort of a movement in terms of people getting back to fundamentals on some level. What I want to ask you guys is how each of you kind of, I don't know, don't let me speak for you. I want to ask you guys each in terms of what kind of has motivated you to get involved either in Braver Angels, in Unity 2020 or any other sorts of work that you're doing, and why that involvement seems important to you in the context of what we're experiencing in America right now. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to go ahead and put somebody on the spot here. Greg, you're our veteran. I'll turn to you, buddy.
Sure. Well, I got involved in Braver Angels because I felt as though the country had lost the ability to speak to each other and to hear differing perspectives. This back in 2016, I was a good little left coast liberal and believed people when they said that they wanted to build a movement based on love and tolerance and mutual respect and all of that. And then when I saw some of the attitudes towards Trump and especially his supporters, I felt disillusioned. I thought that people were using those high-toned words as a power play or as a way to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish while pushing other people aside. It felt like that they didn't mean what they said. And so I was looking for something that actually meant what it said when it said it wanted to bring people together and to hear differing perspectives and to build a movement based on mutual trust and love of country. And Braver Angels was the first thing I saw at about the time that I was thinking that an organization like Braver Angels needed to exist.
Right.
I think Jordan Peterson tweeted it out, and I immediately glommed onto it. In terms of today's circumstances...
Is that true? You saw it because Peterson tweeted us?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. See?
I know, it got somebody.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah. I think somebody worked behind the scenes to make that happen. But so congratulations, whoever did that. You got one social media guy from it.
There you go.
In terms of today's context, I still think it's important to get people in a room together and to be able to hear differing perspectives without losing one's mind. People seem very afraid to have contrary point of views exist or out in the open at all, because there seems to be this knee-jerk fear that it might convince somebody. And oh my God, somebody might think something different than me, and if somebody thinks something different than me, then this bad policy is going to happen, and then we're just a step or two away from the complete existential destruction of America and our way of life.
Right.
So I think Brave Angels is doing a fantastic job, and we need to continue to just get citizens to realize that we're not so scary and that it's not so bad to sit with somebody and to have a mature adult discussion without that tearing apart everything that we hold dear.
Mm-hmm. There you go. And so, Stacia, what is your point of view and what is your story?
Well, I can relate a lot. Just to when you said you believed it, like you were a good, coastal liberal, and you believed, that they were trying to do good kind of thing, or this movement is trying to do something to help people. So actually, I've been politically disengaged pretty much my whole life. I've never voted before. This will be my first year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is very new to me.
But you're only 18, though. So
I turned 30 this year. So, yeah.
Off by just a little bit.
It's been a while. So, yeah. So what happened for me was I started to get politically engaged in June or May, somewhere in there, of this year, with George Floyd, and then with all the stuff with Trump. And, I thought he was going to take America into fascism. And I started to get really scared. And my friends a lot of them are on the left. And so my social media was just flooded with this information that like Trump is terrifying and America's racist, and just it was flooded and it seemed real, and so I started to buy into like part of the country is really, or most of the country is really messed up, and everyone who agrees with Trump, or even all Republicans, are kind of messed up people, or, I didn't, I kind of started to think something was wrong with half the country, I guess. Anyway, and then I started to learn more, just that there are arguments for Trump. Like, I had some friends I didn't expect start to talk about why they support him. And anyway, I guess I just started to learn more, and found that it's not that cut and dry. And then Unity 2020 started, and I had just been looking for something like that. I'd been looking for a solution because I was starting to grasp the problem in a more complete sense, I think. And then I was like, but what do we do?
And what is Unity 2020, Stacia, for people who may not know?
So Unity 2020 was started by Brett Weinstein, and it is a plan. So it's not a party. I guess it's kind of a movement, but it was a plan that we would take a candidate from the left and from the right and pair them together and have them decide who would be president, who would be vice president, with a coin flip, to show that they're really equal. And then they would make all their decisions together. And so the idea was that it would draw support from the left and the right and disengaged voters. And so it was very hopeful and inspiring. And I feel like the sense, or the thing that got me into it, was there was this sense of like the American Revolution.
Right.
In that, like,
that was a long shot too. Right.
Yeah, it was a long shot, and it was just these patriots kind of coming together and deciding things can't go on as they have. And also, the British had their set ways of fighting. Like they would line up and they would take aim, and they had their way of fighting that they expected everyone else to follow. Right. And the American revolutionaries were like, we can't win if we do that, and so they came up with these creative tactics for battling the British in smart ways. And I kind of feel like that was also the vibe of Unity, was like, let's do something different. We've been doing the same thing over and over and it's not working. So let's try something new. And so.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sort of like there's sort of a positive trolling going on with Unity 2020. I felt the social media activity was incredible. And I know that Unity wound up experiencing some issues with, I guess, the regulators of Twitter as a platform and so forth. And so, Unity 2020 didn't succeed in ultimately drafting a bipartisan slate to run for president, but it did bring together thousands of, I think, largely young folks who were, willing to kind of work across the divides to affect real change, right? So definitely want to talk a little bit more about that. Before we do, let's go to my good buddy Al. Hey, Al.
Don't you dare joke on that.
Sorry, guys. We were joking about names and nicknames before we started recording.
And Al is not my nickname.
Al's not.
That's what we decided.
You cannot call her Al. I'm sorry. Okay, Alma. How you doing, Alma?
I'm so good.
What's your story?
What's my story?
How'd you get here?
Well, first off, Stacia, it's so hard to believe that you were politically disengaged because, whoa, what a pivot that is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as she was talking, I was thinking to myself, whoa, my life is like a walking, talking Unity 2020, my whole life. Because it's not that I've been nonpartisan. It's that my life, looking back from the very beginning even, has been kind of bipartisan in its character. So, for example, I mean, my mother and father, I believe, are on different sides of the aisle. My mother is quite right, and my father is quite far left. They put me in a very conservative K through 12 school, but that school was situated in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a liberal college town. Mm-hmm. And then, just going down the chain, I moved to Chicago for university. And I was living in this Mennonite community that was it was like voluntary socialism, basically. Right. There was a common purse. If you join the community properly, they take on your income and they take on your debts, and it's evenly distributed. It's this really radical way of living.
That's one way
beautifully
to get out
radical.
of debt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were urban foraging and dumpster diving our food. It's this very granola textbook, very far left progressive lifestyle. But as I'm living with the Mennonites, I'm volunteering with Bible study on my college campus and living, by all accounts, a very conservative and kind of prudish lifestyle. I've never done drugs. I've always still been sexually abstinent, which, is radical in its own way on the flip side. And then to this day, you mentioned I'm a singer-songwriter. What you didn't mention is that I work in oil and gas. I own a company in North Dakota that helps contractors with their oil field compliance. And so I have this one foot in Los Angeles, the liberal arts world, and then this other foot in Republican land, right. with fossil fuel, everything. And I feel so lucky every day that I get to have that because, there's so much that I've learned being one of them being whoever the other guy is. I am multitudes in that way, I guess. And right. They're my brothers and my sisters, and what a gift it is to be able to call them that.
It's interesting. My parents are also politically different from each other. They're across the aisle from each other, and I think sometimes just how lucky I am that that's the case, because I think that's decreasing now. People are more inclined to marry people they politically agree with, and when I tell that to people, they almost look aghast. They can't imagine that. But I just think because you're able to see then two people who love each other immensely disagree and maybe get in a little bit of a tussle and then kiss each other on the cheek and go on with their lives. And I think we're getting less of that these days. So I think it's truly a gift to see that. And I think I was lucky, and I think you probably say you were lucky too.
Oh yeah, 100%. Unity 2020 families.
Right. Okay. So I mean, that's something that at least three of us have in common, because I'm obviously you guys know, and some people listening will know, but I mean, my mother's liberal Democrat. My father is Republican, conservative. My dad didn't become a Republican until a bit later in life, but, I tell this story so much. I always feel sorry for the people who've heard it a million times. We definitely includes Greg and probably includes the two of you and so plenty of folks listening. But I'll tell the story anyway, just by way of illustration. When I was running for Congress in 2014, whether I was speaking to a Black Democratic church in South LA or to a white Tea Party club in South Bay LA County, I had sort of a similar I had the same canned line when people would ask. They'd say, well, what makes you qualified to represent a district as diverse and complex as the California 43rd? And I would say, well, I have an interesting family background. My mother's a liberal Black Democrat from inner city LA. My father's a conservative white Republican from Tennessee. Grew up explaining my father and my mother, my mother and my father. And that's why I think I can represent all of you. And, it was a line that was always good for a laugh. Dad being born in 1950 and really just for various reasons, in part because he had inherited some kind of some Southern bearing and so forth. He raised me a lot talking about traditional American values and so forth. It was very much a Make America Great Again narrative that focused in on going back to the glory days of American popular culture, when love was about romance, and when good music was fueling the civil rights movement and so forth, and when everybody knew who the heavyweight champion of the world was, and Americans could talk to each other about things culturally before you had a million different TV channels and then the internet and so on and so forth. And so it's not the conventional sort of social conservative narrative, but it mapped onto it in a way that made it easier for me to understand it. And for various other reasons, I wound up becoming more conservative over time. But part of what I'm experiencing now, interestingly, because part of the weird thing about my personality is that I can never be in a room, and whatever the status quo is, I'm always sort of inclined to see what's the other side of it? Mm-hmm. Even if it's a general frame that I agree with, Yeah,
me too.
Yeah, in any room, I'm the contrarian.
Exactly, precisely. And so, one of the things I love, and this is where I want to take us here real quick, one of the things I've loved that's been really stimulating to me in getting engaged with the political conversation these days is going beyond Fox and MSNBC and so forth, and really sort of digging into a lot of that, what we can call the heterodox spaces. For me, the intellectual dark web space has been very exciting. Might be a fun thing for us to talk about a bit, because it has shifted and evolved, and people have been frustrated with it and hated it, and even some of the people who are big names in it have kind of criticized it in various ways, and yet it's opened up this space for conversation. But I've also felt like there's a status quo in that space where, you're talking about Dave Rubin or Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson, different folks, all folks who I love or like in different ways. But I feel like there is sometimes a tendency, and you guys don't have to respond to this directly, but I feel myself growing a little bit more sympathetic with some things I'm hearing on the social left, because I do feel like social justice is an important thing. And sometimes I feel like there's this perspective in this IDW space that is so bent on supporting free speech and so forth, that we sometimes fail to see that even if you don't like phrases like systemic racism, white supremacy, and so forth, these things are at least pointing to things that people are experiencing that are worth analyzing and kind of understanding and engaging in conversation on, right? So, but I just wanted to throw that out there to say that I still feel myself growing, right? I've started left, went right, and now, but I still feel inclined to try and see value in the perspectives from across the map. And so, but the IDW conversation has been interesting to me. It's been interesting to see the conservative movement shift with Donald Trump. Been interesting to see all sorts of things happen. What are some of the conversations that you guys are following? Because there's so many and so many narratives out there that it's hard to occupy all of them at the same time. So, yeah. What are you guys listening to? How are you guys keeping up with things?
Sure. I mean, I can start. So after, having my base of good liberal guy from the left coast shattered a bit, I started to veer more into the traditional conservative movement. When I first picked up a National Review, it blew my mind. I thought, oh my goodness, this is exactly the stuff that interested me in college in my political philosophy classes. They seemed to be talking about current issues through a classical liberal frame that I immediately glommed onto. And I thought, I didn't know that there were people talking about politics like this. The politics I had been exposed to was so outcome oriented. It was, if the Supreme Court is giving you gay marriage one week, then yes, the Supreme Court is amazing. But if the Supreme Court is dissembling campaign finance laws, and no, the Supreme Court is bad, and it felt as though the conservative movement had a fixed philosophy, that there was an attitude towards the Supreme Court that didn't blow with the wind based on what was achieved that week.
It's kind of a clear litmus test.
Yeah, exactly. So I bristle a little bit when you say the conservative movement has changed with Donald Trump, because in my eyes, Donald Trump is populist, nationalist, maybe arguably right-wing, but not a conservative in the classical liberal sense that I would argue that the conservative movement embodies. So I tend to be a little bit ensconced in that movement and find the internecine debates within that movement a little bit more interesting than the typical right-left debates. Part of that is maybe a lack of curiosity on my part, in the sense that I'm so surrounded by people of the left in my day-to-day life.
Sure, right.
And that's where a lot of my information was coming from, even in spaces that are supposed to be neutral. But if we're all honest, like NPR and New York Times, you're going to get a more robust perspective from the left than you are from the right. So perhaps I'm
supposed to be on NPR soon, so we love you, NPR.
You're doing a great job, NPR.
We're very grateful for you.
Yes. Keep up the good work. But so to me, I might just be overcorrecting a little bit and exploring more conservative, classical, liberal, libertarian perspectives, and I should probably balance it with some more thoughtful, liberal in the sort of old democratic FDR sense more than I do. So, but in the meantime, I'm enjoying myself. And I would say also, I think something that has helped my mindset immensely recently is just logging off Twitter for long stretches of time. It used to be my go-to, just I'm bored, so let me just scroll through. And the amount of anger I could start to boil within me in such a short amount of time always surprised me. You see one or two things that you disagree with, and you think, this is what people are saying, this is the narrative, and I can't control it. So I think not being on Twitter and disengaging from that conversation, or at least the conversation in that way, is, I think, allows for more interesting and robust conversations elsewhere.
Well, I'm glad to know that if you don't retweet something that I tweeted and thought that you'd like, that it isn't because you
probably haven't seen it.
John.
Yeah, all my 180 followers sure do miss it, but
Jeez.
Can I just say, it's did we step into a room and we're suddenly not in LA anymore?
I know, right?
You're talking about classical liberalism and like a written textual, and I'm like, what? I can't remember the last time anybody said these words in front of me in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
that's fun.
Well, no, it is. LA is definitely a blue bubble, of course. But on the other hand, the thing that makes, I'm a native-born Angelino. You do have a lot of diversity of backgrounds that land in Los Angeles, 100%. Right? And I think we're all kind of testament to that in one way or another. Alma, Stacia, so how are you guys keeping up with the conversation?
I resonate with a lot of what Greg was saying. Similarly, I guess I have a journey that's somewhat similar to him in that I was very liberal in my 20s, early 20s, I should say, and drifted, as I learned more about economics and things like that, somewhere on the libertarian right. But the thing that has really been engaging to me in the last couple of years is the conversation around free speech. Mm-hmm. I was even listening to something on Glenn Lowry's show this morning about that. And there's this story that I like to tell about my best friend, Chris Thigpen. He's my producer and music director and just MVP of my entire life. And he worked on cruise ships from like 2013 to 2015. When he got on that boat, he left behind a version of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter that was much more open to ideas than when he got off the boat in 2015. It was almost like he woke up from a coma and suddenly, oh, wait, what? Like, we're not allowed to say this anymore? Like, what? People are posting articles about... And he was never particularly politically engaged. But there was a clear shift in that very, very short amount of time where suddenly a lot of us, especially in cities like Los Angeles, are genuinely afraid to say things online for fear of being classified as the other. And you must be this cold-hearted conservative who hates poor people and wants the whole world to burn.
Right.
So yeah, that fear has been really interesting to me as I've noticed it in myself, as I've noticed my friends censoring themselves, as people have started texting me throughout this year, even especially saying, like, I feel like you're a safe person to tell this. I've been thinking about XYZ.
Sure.
What are your thoughts?
Right.
You know, so that's been on my mind a lot this year.
Gotcha. And Stacia, how are you keeping up with the conversation generally? Like, who are you listening to? What are your sources of information? What's the diet look like?
Right now, I'm waiting for the election to be over and kind of focusing on like emotional stability and just...
So tuning out most of that, basically.
Yeah.
That's understandable. Your diet is your fasting, basically.
Yeah, because I need to see a path for how I can fix it, you know? And if I can't see that, I just... why worry about it? Or, you know, like, what's going to happen is going to happen. And if I see a way that I can contribute, then, you know, I move on that. But right now, I don't see it between now and the election, you know? Right. And so, yeah, I figure, so I'm like making courses, like trying to help individuals, and also, I can relate so much to what you were saying about that fear. Like posting about unity, every time I would post, I would get a bunch of comments and often private messages. And like one friend private messaged me like, why are you trying so hard to find common ground? And I'm like, to prevent civil war? Like, I mean,
for one.
Yeah.
For starters.
You know,
like, what is the plan? If, you know, yeah.
It's interesting what you say, because I think, you know, there are probably some people who are listening to this or who would listen to this who would hear you say, I'm trying to take a step back, and would probably come back with something along the lines of, it's too important to stand back. If you're not doing something, you're part of the problem, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's really wrong. I actually really do believe in trying to make changes within your scope of influence and letting go of the things that you can't control. And the result of this election is not something that you, I, or anybody can control. We can have conversations, but other than that, we're not going to affect the vote of 330 million people, less than that, because that's, but whatever. And I think that's so interesting, is I think if more people had that mindset, more people would start to go, who can I influence? What can I do? And they would start looking more and more towards their local communities, as trite as that can sound sometimes, but look at their civic groups, their churches, their things like Brave Angels or Unity that almost act as little institutions, bringing people together in a world where those institutions are crumbling. And so I think that stance of saying, I'm not going to worry about it, is actually a much stronger stance than I think a lot of people are going to get that you would get credit for, a lot of people get credit for.
Yeah, it's not a meek response.
It's like the Serenity Prayer.
I was just thinking that, the Serenity Prayer. I didn't want to take it there, John, but go ahead, brother.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, I can't quote it back exactly the way it's written, which I should feel bad about, but, you know, something to the effect of, Alma, help me out.
God, give me the courage to accept the things I cannot change, the discipline or something to change the things
something to accept the things something to act on the things you can change, you know, maybe wisdom to accept the things that you can't change, or something to accept the things that you can't change. Maybe it's humility, and the wisdom to tell the difference, right?
exactly where I'm at.
Yeah, there's this, I think it's, I don't want to speak out of turn, I think it's a Buddhist Zen-ish proverb. I might be wrong. I'm
really,
so sorry.
Really butchering the wisdom literature.
I really am. But it's like, if
where's my phone? I should probably bring it up so I can actually read it. But
Yeah.
we get the point though.
But wait, real quick, it was if you're unhappy and you can do something about it, why be unhappy? If you're unhappy and you can't do something about it, why be unhappy? It's a pithier version of that prayer.
Yeah.
And I feel like if more people were doing that, it would be a lot less tense right now. I feel like part of the problem is that people are so upset by the stuff they can't control, and they're just getting worked up about it, and that's where the vitriol is coming from. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, one response to that, of course, is, well, the three of us or four of us are lucky that our lives aren't so drastically affected by the outcome of this election that we don't have to care as much. Is that a response that you've heard in response?
Well, if there's something you can do, like phone banking, or, I mean, I'm just saying, what can you do that's actually effective?
No, I hear you. Yep.
Yeah, because I do care very much about the outcome of the country, moving forward. It's just when there's nothing you can do, there's no reason to be upset.
And it's so funny. Like, we put so much stock in this one day, like the election day and the outcome of the election. It reminds me a little bit of like a husband and wife who celebrate Valentine's Day really extravagantly, or the anniversary or something. But the other 364 days of the year, they're not kind to each other. Like, come on. Life is not just this thing that happens between elections. That's the meat of it. That's what life is about, is those moments in between, and we act like everything hangs on those particular moments.
Well, first of all, here is the text of the Serenity Prayer, authored by Reinhold Niebuhr, by the way, which I did not know. To accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference, forever and ever in the next. So, yeah, I mean, it's... Amen, right? There is a way in which I think the national conversation tends to drive us all to want to find some little space on the lever of national power to feel like we're helping to push it or pull it in one direction, which is totally legitimate because, I mean, we vote for president. We have a voice in, the way things go nationally, and that's important. But I don't even want to drive a localism versus national kind of like choice binary here. Although, Greg, I'm sure you'd have a lot to say about that. But the thing that I note is, Stacia, I mean, you made this point where you said that, you're looking to see how you can plug into where it's meaningful. But otherwise, you're not trying to sacrifice your psychological well-being by just taking in the fire hose of toxicity that comes through all this, right? One of the remarkable things about, that I've, observed in the context of my political experience, running for office, getting involved in, politics in my own community and so forth, is that, like, the environment pushes a lot of good people and a lot of thoughtful people and well-meaning people and people who are professionals and have skills and insights beyond activism, right or left, right? The nature of the conversation pushes people away. And I think that part of what we're trying to build at Braver Angels, and I think that, Unity 2020's culture reflects this, and other folks in the depolarization space, our friends at Living Room Conversations, and, National Conversations Project, we can go down the list, but we're trying to build up spaces that are actually inviting of people who have, who are acting from a place of good faith, who want to sort of be motivated by goodwill in politics, in civic engagement, to be constructive, right? To aim towards not just driving a particular outcome, but building the sorts of relationships and the sorts of culture of community that's in keeping with the type of society we want to build. People want to get involved in a way to where they can channel those feelings, they can channel those motivations, right? And so I think that getting involved in that kind of work in your community is meaningful because it's a step towards building that culture out, both where you are, but across the country too. And so, for me, the work of Braver Angels just becomes so vital because I think it is possible for us to connect people across the country in that kind of an effort. The question is how do we begin to shift the larger dialogue in a more constructive direction. And Alma, I'm gonna just toss the ball to you really quick, because part of how you and I connected has been through music, or at least, I can't remember. You may have reached out to me, or I may have reached out to...
Yeah, I DM'd you after you appeared on Lowry's podcast. Okay,
right. And one of the things we have in common is musical background. Of course, I pretend to be an artist and musician. You really are one, because we want to sort of shift things culturally, it seems like art and music is potentially like a way to do that. And music has been a part of Braver Angels culture. We had a songwriting contest where we had some incredible, and we'll link to this, but we had some incredible music submissions that have appeared in some of our programming, and we've had concerts for our national conventions. It's been an incredible sort of thing. But the project of humanizing the American people has to go beyond just debate and argument. So just from an artist's vantage point, I'm just curious sort of like what you think in general about art's role in changing the culture.
Yeah, I think there's generally two lanes you could take. There's, one person over here who would say art's role in this is to help us forget and escape. Right. There was even a gentleman in a Braver Angels music meeting the other day, I think it was the Songwriting Circle, who was talking about this event he put on where he invited half Republicans, half Democrats to perform in this showcase. Right. And now they weren't singing songs about politics. They didn't speak about what their politics were. You didn't know who was who. So when they got up on the stage, you could be clapping for a Democrat right now, God forbid, or a Republican. Right. And so that's the lane of let's put our differences aside and just come together and dance. I think Chloe Valdry would resonate with that as well.
I was gonna say, is that Chloe?
Yeah, it's very Chloe, the DJ slash philosopher slash a lot of things. Right. Chloe. Yeah. And then the second lane is using music to talk about and discuss quote unquote these issues, whether the issue is unity or the issue is a particular political policy or stance. Right. And that's very challenging to do. At least it's challenging to do elegantly, where you're not just like reading a bunch of policy prescriptions to beat poetry or something, But that's, I don't know exactly where I would land on that. I think it's not either or, it's both and. But I'm pleased to be able to explore that with the Braver Angels Music Committee for sure.
Right, yeah.
I think there's sorry to interrupt, but I think there's an interesting thing going on in art right now. So back when I was on the left, I went very far left, and I was reading the World Socialist website a lot because I had a friend who wrote for there, and I started exploring it and dove down. I don't have to justify it, whatever. But the reason I left is because of their arts coverage.
If you were still a World Socialist, man, you'd still be welcome in the club here.
Thank you.
Hanging with the Mennonites.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. But the reason I left was because I didn't like their approach to the arts, which is essentially, is this advancing the cause? And if it is, then it is good. And if it is not, then it is bad. And I think we're almost seeing in the popular arts world these days an almost refracted analogous situation to what's going on in the political realm, in that in a lot of areas, art is not expected to represent the human condition anymore, or present truths however they may manifest, whether they're challenging or unpopular. Right now in the popular culture, there seems to be an attitude of, I want my art to help, and it needs to advance a cause. It needs to make this point. And if it doesn't do that, no matter the quality of the art itself, it's good or bad. And so I think a way that we can use art to help is getting back to that, what we want artists to do, and that pure artistic impulse of creating from a genuine place and speaking the truth, or creating truth as the individual sees it, and letting the chips fall of its impact where they may. So I think there's an actual interesting analogy to Braver Angels and the arts world and what's happening in society at large.
It's interesting. I feel like all of this subtlety in music gets collapsed when you try to funnel it through this very narrow political or cause lens. And I definitely appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah, right. No, I hear that entirely. And it's sort of a sad thing because I feel like everything, I'm obviously not the first person to say this, but one of the reasons we're here, I think, is because we live in a moment where everything has been politicized, right? And to sort of take it back to my dad again, like I said, my dad sort of raised me with a type of Make America Great Again sort of narrative. But I would refer to my dad as like a pop culture conservative, And he felt that music, among his many opinions, he felt that music and, art and entertainment was sort of just much more unifying once upon a time. Although he grew up in the 60s, and obviously, music was a huge part of social activism and maybe it could have been considered polarizing and so forth. But I just feel like there's this degree to which we just can't share anything anymore. It's hard to watch football because, for a lot of folks, it's like, okay, wait a second, is this person going to take a knee? Is this person going to put his hand over his heart for the salute and so forth? The Oscars are clearly not meant for all Americans. That is a show for folks that is a production for folks who are in a certain camp. But it wasn't always that way. And I guess getting back to the point to where we can share things again becomes a vital sort of project. I'm sorry, Stacia, did you want to jump in on that point?
Well, yeah. So I'm a social dancer.
Oh my gosh, I used to compete in ballroom.
Nice.
Yeah.
So right now I'm focused on West Coast swing.
That's a very freeform style.
Yes. And so our dance community has changed just recently, and that's part of why I've become politically engaged, is because everything has become political. Like, most studios are shut down right now with COVID, but there's this huge, witch hunt, or just, if you're doing dances, they will be mad, or a lot of people will be mad, and then other people are there's a lot of conflict right now in the dance scene, which it's fair. COVID is a challenge to our community. It's just unfortunate that it's really tearing us apart, and then there's a lot of politics in dance right now. And so I completely agree that we need to get back to a point where we can just do stuff together, and not even bring up our politics in some spaces maybe. But also I wanted to add that I kind of have a theory that the current political climate is partially from a lack of purpose, or a lack of I think a lot of people aren't religious now. I'm not religious, but I think people need some sense of being part of something bigger and something really meaningful. And I feel like our politics right now feel life or death. They feel epic, and I think that's part of why people are so passionate about it, maybe. And so I kind of see the arts as potentially a space that could create that sense of magic and passion, and give people something else to believe in that makes them feel alive.
It's like, where do we find meaning, right? And the point that you're making, Stacia, is one that our colleague April Lawson would, really go into depth in a profound way. But we could take this point in the direction of saying, therefore the decline of religion as an institution in American life is a huge issue, and the decline of civil society. Robert Putnam wrote the book, Bowling Alone. What was it, a little over 20 years ago now, or so forth. But there's been this kind of dissolving of social capital, the relationships that exist between the American people, even putting aside the political polarization for various reasons. The presence of just people interacting in their bowling leagues, baseball teams, local clubs and associations. We don't have as many friends in American life, I guess, as we used to in previous times. We don't know each other as well, even as we're hyper connected in the digital space, right? And I think that for me, part of like the global shift in like our understanding of things for me that I want to kind of push a little bit kind of starts there, you know, because I feel like, you know, we have, and even though conservatives are on a rhetorical level more likely to say things that point to this, I feel like conservatives are just as bad as progressives on this point. Whether you're saying that, you know, government is the mechanism by which to solve a wider range of problems, or if you're saying government is the problem, we have this obsession with government and politics in a way that just focuses in on the levers of power, which is, you know, understandable. I mean, the Unity 2020 movement, I think, had a lot to do, well, you know, obviously centered around this idea that, you know, we've got major kind of, you know, structures of corruption in place that you need to find sort of a patriotic center to stand up and challenge. And, you know, totally legitimate, right? But the thing preventing good people from... Part of what makes it so easy for us to be divided these days, I think, is the fact that this lack of obvious place to sort of find social meaning, in part in the absence of like relationships that connect us, you know, the atomization of the American lifestyle. It's left us in a place to where, like, you know, we need to fight a battle in order to feel like we exist, I think. And, you know, that's one way to feel like you exist. It's one way to find a community, to find people who are frustrated in the way you are, but to also find people who are motivated by the kind of like positive impetus towards connection. Like, that's a way to be recognized too. That's a way to be seen too, right? But in order to do that, you've got to break down the barriers to empathy. You can't be building them up, you know? So, I mean, that's just...
It's always so much easier to break anything down than build it up.
Right.
You know, and the process of, I don't know exactly what this would look like, but rebuilding those very small, intimate structures of lives, like the community that you see in a church or in a family, that takes a lot of time, and it's not a sexy process at all. There's no war cry for that.
Yeah.
It's lived out in the everyday movements that you make and the everyday interactions that you're having. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's not explosive.
Right.
And explosions are cool to watch.
Explosions are cool to watch. But, you know, I'm a student of nonviolence, and, you know, Dr. King's, you know, the movement that he led in the 60s. And what was amazing about that was activism rooted in constructive community in that way, you know. I mean, you remember, you guys have all seen footage of those marches. They're singing songs together. They're not, and look, most movements are a bit raucous and chaotic, most protest movements and so forth. So, you know, this is not, don't read like an implicit condemnation of Black Lives Matter, or, you know, or anybody else into this. But I just note that if you look at that history, you know, I mean, you had spiritual songs being sung and people holding hands and linking arms and basically signaling to the people that they were opposing that, you know, we're standing for justice in a way that's seeking spiritual harmony with the very people who we are opposed to, because we're looking for changes in the law, but we're looking to build community at the same time. That was the idea of the beloved community.
Yeah, you even see that in the boycotts, which went on for so long. The perseverance and the endurance there is just insane. And there's an anecdote I heard from, it must have been the Montgomery Bus Boycotts. Some white women would give black women rides on their way to work to help them, you know, replace the transportation that they had chosen to opt out of. And that's such a picture of beautiful unity right there, and and also a picture of a small act of kindness really being where the revolution is rooted.
Yeah. So we're, you know, I think that in the work that we're doing, we're kind of trying to build sort of the structure and the culture for something like that today. I mean, look, the challenge today is that when it comes down to it, if we started here, the four of us, having kind of a brass tacks conversation in terms of like, okay, well, what are the problems in American life? On a material level, it's like we've been dealing with this pandemic. We've experienced tremendous economic loss. Some people will say we've lost our standing in the global community, all these sorts of things. You start looking at it technocratically. It's like, what policy things do we think need to happen? What political shifts need to change in order to get certain special interests, a smaller seat at the table and bring in the people more, very important conversations to have, could be at it sort of endlessly, right? And it's worth doing it. But creating kind of the sea change in terms of what the norms are for how we engage in these conversations and having that scale up, that becomes the focus. And so with Braver Angels, we're a membership organization. We've got 11 or 12,000 dues paid members across the country, about 60 local alliances and so forth, presences on college campuses across the country. We've got our own fledgling digital media network. You're listening to it now, folks, right? Some of our personalities and so forth. We have relationships with some elected officials, a lot of elected officials who are out of office. Those are the easiest ones to get involved, right? The ones who don't have to worry about getting reelected. But we're grateful for those. We've got relationships with some artists and entertainers, with journalists, so on and so forth. I think that the challenge for us today is just sort of like, how do you take all of these pieces, put it together in a way to where there is a vision for the American people that becomes salient, right? Because I think that this is what America is going to need after this coming Tuesday. Right, because right now everybody's focused in on the ballots that are about to be cast, and we're all just waiting to see what the outcome is. But, what is the American vision after that? And I want to, just get you guys' sense. And granted, none of us really have the answer to that, like 100%, right? But we're here because we have something inside of us, I think, that's moving us towards some picture that at least, the four of us and many of the people listening to us will increasingly be sharing. We could have a vision that says, okay, we've got to root fascism out of America, and we've got to, sweep into the institutions to make this happen. Or, we've got to crush the rise of, identity politics and, social justice extremism, and we've got to get this stuff out of the federal government. We've got to use executive orders, this, that, or the other. And all of those are strategies for, clubbing the other side over the head, winning a short-term political victory that doesn't show us how we rebuild, the civil society, democracy, our relationships. What does the vision look like for a genuine unity movement, for a unified America the day after? And so, I'm just curious to get you guys' instincts on that. Not to paint like the whole picture, but whatever little piece of the picture you might feel like you sort of see a bit. Starting with Stacia, I'm gonna throw that pitch right to you.
I'd really like to see a very strategic organization or movement kind of step up as the head. That's maybe it's Braver Angels, but that's connecting all these people. Because
Greg is making it happen, by the way.
Nice. Being part of Unity, what we found is that there are actually so many organizations like this that are trying to reform America and trying to unify. I think there's United America, and there's just a lot going on right now, and a lot of new ones popping up. And also a lot of leaders stepping up. So Andrew Yang just had Justin Amash. So Andrew Yang is a Democrat, and Justin Amash is a libertarian, used to be Republican. And so they talked on a podcast together. And at the end of it, they were like, let's keep in touch. We need to fix this country. Let's work together. And so I feel like that's what we need, is just a very strategic, connections, and people who are just committed to the outcome of getting the country working again, because it just doesn't seem to be functioning. And there are some, massive structural things, in how Congress works, and just a number of things that, if they're fixed, we could actually start to make the changes that we need to see. And so, it's kind of vague, but something
No.
strategic.
I mean, you're painting. For me, it's pretty clear what you're saying. You know, make the connections, identify the leaders and the institutions that are already pushing in a certain direction, and actually sort of consolidate a coalition, right? That can begin to move in the direction of figuring out how these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
So I mean,
and it has to be.
I'm with you.
Has to be like bipartisan for real, because another thing I learned from Unity was that, like, I thought the ideas on the left were the answers, and then talking to conservatives and libertarians, I've just found there are a lot of valid criticisms and concerns that they bring up that provide a really good checks and balances in terms of making sure we can actually reach the outcomes we want. Like, some of the progressive ideas end up having unexpected consequences that the right is good at checking. And so it really needs to have that dynamic of mutual respect, where those differing opinions are seeking to find a solution together, rather than fighting egotistically, right? Like, rather than I'm right, we need to do it my way, looking for how we can find a solution that both sides think could work.
It's interesting to me, Stacia, when you brought up leadership, you immediately went to an example being set between two people that are influencers or admired in the political space. Specifically, they work in politics. But you can imagine another sets of influencers in different spheres coming up to really take that leadership role. And I feel like that's maybe the best bet that we have, because, I mean, John, you asked about vision, and immediately I kind of like, I had a reaction to that, because I thought, well, vision is kind of a top-down word. Vision is led by visionaries, and visionaries are, they're calling the shots, and they're telling people what to do. And that's not what I see the answer being, because community, we just talked about the void in people's hearts, spiritually and emotionally, mentally. That's a community problem, and community is bottom up. So I don't exactly know what that looks like, but I definitely see it being bottom up. And if there's leadership, I see it like leading by example, people that are respected and admired, like this John Wood Jr. right here, going out in the world and showing that it can be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny, because it's like, it's leading by example, I think, is most effective when it's based in the kind of like simplest truth, right? For me, it's like, the thing that I just try and keep in mind is this sort of golden rule. You love your neighbor as you love yourself. If that's the starting point, for me it is. Like, how does that express itself in every other aspect of our lives and the way societies function and so forth? And it's possible to like take a virtue like love, right, and to run it through a political ideology where suddenly, like, tolerance is a good example, right? Like, I am for tolerance, but in being for tolerance, we have to like villainize or demonize folks whose attitudes are intolerant and adopt a very intolerant spirit towards folks who are actually human beings and may even have some valid points on their side and so forth. But you can't see it because you've taken, a simple starting point and turned it into an ideology. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm saying is that, like, I really do believe that even if you're not religious, there's a spiritual aspect to our reality. And this is a big part of what Dr. King taught. And in order for us to like build a world on the outside that lives up to a certain ideal, like, we've got to embody it on the inside. That's why nonviolence was about avoiding not just external physical violence, but like internal violence of the spirit and so forth, avoiding inward condemnation of people with whom you have disagreements, and focusing instead on simply identifying, whatever the evil or wickedness is in its abstraction, the spirit of that, right? As opposed to condemning the people who are caught up in that spirit, because then it's caught up in you too, So, I mean, yeah, that's kind of where I start in terms of thinking, like, on the ground level, what captivates people in this. But Greg, I feel like I cut in front of you, man. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, in terms of the vision I see for the country's future, I mean, look, I'm conservative, classical liberal, libertarian-ish, some mixture of whatever those words are. So I'm going to approach it from that perspective. And you said something earlier about conservatives' attitude towards government, and I think that's a valid and widespread criticism of conservatives. I would phrase it slightly differently, in that right now I see a lot of people who think politics is getting what they want, and so long as they are getting that, then whatever gets you there is justified. So I think that's why, now that the Supreme Court might not be a means towards getting things a lot of liberals want, now let's talk about packing the Supreme Court maybe, and that way we'll get more of what we want. And I think President Trump, with some of his executive orders, doing end runs around Congress, people want to get what they want, and they don't see why they can't get it. And I think that is a politics oriented towards the ends and not the process. And to me, politics is more of a process. So it's not, is government good, is government bad? It's government is good at doing certain things, and it should do certain things. And so let's orient government towards doing those things and leave those other things outside of the government purview. And I think liberals would say, conservatives would have a more restrictive attitude towards what is a legitimate use of government, and liberals would have a slightly more expansive. But when you're having that debate, you're actually having a worthwhile, respectful debate. But we've gotten into a politics where we want certain specific ends and use apocalyptic rhetoric in order to get people to support those ends. And when we do that, we're not having a good debate. So for me, if I could wave a wand after this election, and honestly, I was kind of hoping that President Trump would sort of, like, things would be so bad that people would sort of go back towards process, and I don't think they have. Everyone goes, no, now I really have to get what I want. But it would be a politics where people respect the process of politics more, because I think in that space, real debate can happen that doesn't have this tinge of existential dread attached to it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm with you. And my inner Burkean, is pleased with that.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about what I think we've all sort of, we all had different answers to that question, but none of it was zero sum, right? I think that everything that each of us said here, at least, kind of contributes to some larger kind of vision or image that's kind of taking shape. I think in the larger mind of this greater movement that I see is forming. And I do think that beyond Unity 2020, I think that there is a broader unity movement, if you will, just to grab that phrase for a second, that is seeking kind of like a more kind of like transcendent way of meaningfully connecting people, that doesn't push out, the different streams that are advocating for free speech, advocating for social justice, advocating to, clean up structural corruption in politics, but is basically saying, like, look, to advocate for all of the good things that need to be advocated, we need to have kind of like some sort of a renaissance in the way we live with each other and the way we interact with each other politically and civically that can accommodate, goods that are competing for attention, but on the other hand, still legitimate and still necessary to be engaged in and to make space for in their own right? And so it's a larger kind of paradigm shift that I think we're striving towards. And I imagine that the four of us will be able to complete the picture of what that looks like the next time we get together. On the,
we're saving the world, guys.
There you go. One podcast at a time, one workshop at a time. So, folks, this has been a lot of fun. Alma Cook, Greg Steinbrecher, Stacia Wilson. So nice to be with you guys, my friends. Look forward to seeing you all on the other side of the election. So,
if the world still exists,
if we're still standing, which we will be.
We will be, Greg.
We will be.
I believe it.
Existential dread notwithstanding. Don't bet against America, folks. And for you folks who are listening and watching at home, if you want to get involved in the work of building a house united, if you want to be a part of this swelling unity movement, then join us. Be a member. Join us at braverangels.org. Get involved with your local alliance. Participate in a Braver Angels debate. Organize with us. Volunteer. Contribute to us on the media side. Like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Be a part of what we're doing. We will see you on the other side of the election. Godspeed to you, and don't lose your faith. The United States of America's best days are yet to come. Until next time.